Good evening. Just in case, and to be clear, in case you weren't clear, I'm not the new techie on this part of the title. I'm the old activist. And to prove it, well, my talk will prove it. So in my 20s, early and mid, I had just come out of Berkeley, and I was convinced, this is through lots of experiences in student movement and coming out of the sort of the tail end of the 60s civil rights era, I was convinced that the rest of my life I was going to be a revolutionary. And so late 70s, early 80s, I joined an organization that was also full of people who were convinced they were going to be revolutionaries for the rest of their lives. Our tools at the time were convening in small living rooms and planning when we were going to make the call to each other about how to mobilize to change the world. We had publications like this, The Line of March, Marxist-Leninist Journal of Rectification, and for those of you who weren't quite sure what rectification is, it is about changing the U.S. capitalist system into something more socialist and different, and that's not doing it justice. But that's one proof of my age is I forget exactly what all of those conversations were about. But I remember, though, that we were committed to, when we were asked to commit, that when the time came, we were going to be part of the phone tree that answered the call and joined when the call came to go up in arms. And I remember thinking for myself, what was I really going to do when I got that call? Because it wasn't an anonymous call. It was going to be a call from somebody who knew me, right, and was calling me to action. Well, now you can do this anonymously, right? You don't have to be in study groups where, in fact, you had to give up a good square meal in place of a pack of cigarettes that really sort of kept you going through the night and through the study and through the analysis and through the figuring out of what the strategy was in order to be able to do revolution. Now it's bring your tent, right? Anybody. And so 40 characters suffices. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? We don't know yet, right? This is what we're trying to figure out. Does the generation divide, right, where I used a phone and a phone tree, and now we use 40 characters, does that make a difference in the way that we're going to have social change impact in the world? I don't have an answer, but I'm hoping that our shared destiny is going to provide us with an answer. At the time, we signed the petitions that were given to us, right? Now, you can crowdsource, you can choose, right? You can sort, you can search, you can do all kinds of things. That's a good thing, right? But is it a better thing? My first protest was when I was 11 in 1968. Another proof of I'm really the old activist, not the new techie, right? Me and my friends in grade school joined the line on Geary Street in San Francisco. Somebody handed us a sign. We marched. I was hooked. One of my last protests was at 49, 2006, against the war in Iraq. Same method, same strategy, different people, sort of, right? But we still were caring about the same things. We were called together in a different way, but it was still important for us to use this form to have our voices heard. Through the decades, from when I was 11 to 49 and now at 57, almost 58, lots of things that I could be involved with my community around learning how to protest, learning how to demonstrate, learning how to create social change, ethnic studies movement at Cal. Those of you who in the audience might remember Ferdinand Marcos's dictator in the Philippines, very involved with the anti-Marcos, anti-fascist movement at the time. But we didn't just use protests. We used political theater. We used cultural expression. We use an integration of all of these different tools and strategies as a way to have the voice heard and to move action. These were people's lives at stake, right? We were talking about torture victims. We're talking about human rights and moving that, and you had to use all forms, all tools, all tactics available to you to knit that together to create change. Got involved with affirmative action. This is a picture of the Bakke decision that was for the first time, it struck down racial quotas in the admission of students of color to the University of California. It marked the decline of the ability to use affirmative action or race and ethnicity as a basis for creating equality in education. The Reagan era really began to break the social contract between government's responsibility for really sort of providing for the needs of the most needy in the local community. Before that, the federal government used a revenue share, the tax dollars, between the federal government and local communities. So those monies could be distributed in a way that really sort of were more directly attributable to the needs in the local community. You had the rise of the multinational corporation at this time, and the beginning of using a little bit of different tactics for being able to push which side of the fence you were on in this type of justice movement. Moving to work around health access. The ACT UP AIDS movement, or the AIDS movement, really sort of for the first time brought to national attention that personal responsibility is not a strategy for saving lives, right? And so all of the notion around, here we are, it's your fault that you are sick, right? The folks in this picture said absolutely not, and protest, and really sort of being able to have a no-holds-barred approach to disruption and protest and making sure things are heard. I remember I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I was speaking to a crowd of 2,000 people. It was one of the first national AIDS conferences at the time, and they told me in advance that ACT UP was going to come and disrupt my talk because it was important to make sure that demonstration really sort of captured the attention of that crowd of a people. And, it's what had to be done, right? Disruption is an important tactic, right? Fast forward to where I think the rise of the new forms of mobilizing, organizing, using social media as a way to bring people together to move an agenda, move an issue, right? This to me was a mark where I recognized that there was a generational change in the activism. Who was being active, who was being heard, who were the leaders of a movement that they could self-determine, right? And so I recall these social media became to be a phenomenon around that time, and maybe it was before that, but it was in my generation's recognition that we might have had the message, we might have had the history, but we didn't necessarily have all the right tools anymore to move an issue of justice and change. But are we still relevant? Is there a generational divide? Do we have a role to play, right, in today's issues, in today's making change, in today's issues around equity and justice? Absolutely, we do, right? It's still about civil rights. This is a picture of the Friendship Nine. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Friendship Nine. These were the college classmates who were arrested. It was the first sit-in, and they were arrested for daring to go into a coffee shop that was whites only. They were arrested just a couple of days ago. They finally got the charges and an apology removed against them. But it's still about civil rights. It's still about mobilizing people for action for the right thing. And the ways for protesting are still the same. It still requires disruption. It still requires conviction. It still requires people to, whether you do it on a hashtag basis or whether you do it just in other ways, it still requires the ability to be convicted and to use whatever tools are available to achieve the same aim. It's still about human rights. When I showed the picture about the Marcos dictatorship, it was about torture victims and murder victims in that dictatorship. And today, it's about disappearances in Mexico from the narco regime that with impunity is able to decide that they don't want protests or they don't want their issues being raised. We need students who are mobilizing using whatever tools they possibly can to address these issues. So there's still, human rights doesn't change just because, there's 40 years difference between issues. Still about health equity. Healthcare is a right, but now we have the opportunity to address it on a very personal and discrete level through innovation, through invention, using not the handset telephone, but the smartphone today. It's still about economic justice. The fight for a living wage is not a new fight, but there are now new ways for a living wage to be achieved, right? It doesn't have to be about a paycheck, right? It can be about an app that allows somebody to create a business in a cashless economy. So we still need to protest. And we still need to engage the artists and the entertainers, the princes of the world, to popularize the message. And we need all of you, those of you who, the 10 of you who created your companies, your apps, who are entrepreneurs, who are coders, who are engineers, who are innovators. This is sort of a simple way to encapsulate it. But now we have new tools and tactics. We didn't have those in the 60s, we didn't have them in the 70s. It doesn't make it less or more legitimate. It's just an enhancement of what we need to be able to do today. And this is just sort of, one of the ways to show that there are ways to express the difference between those of us who did social justice work, equity work, social good work, social change work, social impact work, in the decade where I was ascendant, right? But it doesn't mean we have to misunderstand the way that it's done today. The generation gap does not necessarily have to mean a generational divide. So that's my non-techie, pro-activist word for the day, for the week. And now maybe we can go and have a drink and discuss how we bridge that divide. Thank you.